I will admit that this is a note that will probably only mean something to you if you are a news dork. But if you are a news dork, this was kind of an amazing sight online today. This is the front page of the Huffington Post tonight. Look, there's 2 leads. As far as we can tell, they've never had to do that ever before. I mean, newspaper websites and other news sites, they divide up their front pages regularly to show when there are multiple big stories. But Huffington Post is online only. They're the biggest of the online news sites, and they follow the online convention of always picking one big thing going on to be their big solo lead with the big picture. But today, we think for the first time ever, they stacked them. With the government shutdown and the president talking to Iran, we've got 2 stories tonight that are each too big to be upstaged. So they both got the lead. If you are a news dork, an online news dork, that's like finding a golden ticket in your chocolate bar. That's like a news dork double rainbow. Today was a very, very big day in the news. A double day in the news. Hold on. 1979 was a really long time ago. In 1979, this was an SUV. In 1979, this was how basketball players wore their shorts. In 1979, this was a nice stereo. This was 1979's collection of the greatest white guy hair on earth. And if your computer machine in 1979 needed to be seen by your eyes, you had to hook it up to your TV to use as a monitor. 1979 was a very, very different time. I am old and I can barely remember 1979. In fact, I'm not even really sure that I can. But 1979 is the last time that there was direct contact between the leader of our country and the leader of Iran. 1979 was, of course, the year of the revolution in Iran, which brought to power a new religious radical cadre. And when they took more than 50 Americans hostage for more than 14 months, relations between our 2 countries were broken off in a seemingly permanent way. There is no American embassy in Iran anymore. There's no Iranian embassy here. And of course, that makes a political point, but embassies and consulates also do very practical work for citizens when they're overseas. Because of this breakdown between us and Iran, if you're an American citizen and you travel to Iran, the U.S. State Department warns you before you go that America will not be able to help you if something goes wrong for you there. If an American citizen has a problem while in Iran, let's say you lose your passport or you get arrested or there's a natural disaster and you need to get out of the country, actually the Embassy of Switzerland may step in and try to help you as an American, but what the Swiss can do for you, of course, is limited because you are not a Swiss citizen. So we have not had any diplomatic interaction with Iran since 1979. Since 1979, there has been no contact, no official contact between the leaders, political leaders in Iran and political leaders in the United States. So last night felt like a huge breakthrough when we were able to report this picture here on the air. When our Secretary of State, John Kerry, sat down yesterday for a meeting with his counterpart in the Iranian government at the UN. They spoke. They shook hands. This development last night was something that had not happened in 34 years in our country. This was just a big freaking diplomatic deal. That was last night. And then today, it was like the sky cracked open.
Just now, I spoke on the phone with President Rouhani of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
You spoke to who now? Seriously? What happened?
The 2 of us discussed our ongoing efforts to reach an agreement over Iran's nuclear program. I reiterated to President Rouhani what I said in New York. While there will surely be important obstacles to moving forward, and success is by no means guaranteed, I believe we can reach a comprehensive solution.
A phone call is a small thing in the great big world, but this particular phone call is of historic proportions. President Obama and President Rouhani reportedly talked for about 15 minutes this afternoon. These are 2 countries whose leaders have not been able to find a way to talk to each other since 1979, even though, frankly, they have had a lot they needed to talk about. One snippet of their actual conversation was actually tweeted out by the Iranian president just after the phone call ended. He said, in a phone conversation between Iranian and U.S. presidents just now, the president of Iran concluded the conversation by saying in English, "Have a nice day." And President Obama then said, "Thank you." And then he spoke in Farsi, Khoda Hafez. President Obama said goodbye to Iran's president in Farsi. Goodbye, God be with you. And that, according to a senior administration official, was, quote, appreciated by the Iranians. There's probably a big birther freakout going on in some corner of the right-wing internet right now, where they're kicking themselves saying, "Oh, he's not from Kenya. Obviously, he's Persian. We misunderstood. He's secretly Iranian. He speaks Farsi." There are obviously still huge differences between our countries. Everything from Iran's nuclear program to their support for terrorist groups. But today's direct contact between these two men, for the first time since new cars looked like this direct contact and the promise of new talks to come is for the first time in a generation a sign that we might make progress on the differences between us, and we might do it without a war. How did this happen? How did we get to this point? Ever since the relationship between the U.S. and Iran fell apart, after the Iranian Revolution and the hostage crisis, American presidents have used sanctions to put pressure on the people running Iran to try to get them to stop doing what it was they were doing. President Carter imposed the very first set of sanctions. He banned oil imports. He froze Iranian government assets. President Reagan tightened the sanctions. He banned the sale of anything to Iran that could be used militarily. He labeled Iran a state sponsor of terrorism. He did also secretly ship missiles to Iran, but that was illegal, and we're not supposed to think of that when we think of Reagan. Anyway, under President Clinton, there were more sanctions against Iran's oil industry specifically. President Clinton also banned Americans from investing any money in Iran. The point, every time these sanctions got stricter, was to further isolate Iran, to hurt its economy, and to create a different climate over there within that country, to create intolerable internal pressure from the Iranian people against their own government, to make life so difficult for the average Iranian citizen that they would turn against their own government whose policies were leading to these sanctions, to create domestic internal pressure in Iran for Iran to change its ways. And every president since President Carter imposed more and more sanctions against Iran. But the tactic never really seemed to be doing anything until now, all of a sudden, something has caused what has happened today. It was not until this president and this administration that the United States began imposing the harshest and most stringent sanctions Iran has ever seen. Under the Obama administration, we have banned all Iranian imports. We have sanctioned not just Iranian companies, but anyone doing business with Iranian companies. Maybe the biggest blow was when the U.S. and the EU banded together to cut Iran off from processing any financial transactions involving its oil industry. They essentially isolated Iran's central bank from the global economy. For a brief moment there, we even got China, longtime trade partner with Iran, on board with our sanctions. The Obama administration has led the world on this effort to isolate Iran's economy to a degree that had never been done before. Just last month, Iran reported that it had lost almost 60% of its oil revenue due to this American-led sanction regime. And if the intended effect was to make life so miserable for ordinary people in Iran as to make ordinary Iranians put pressure on their own government for change, well, that happened. I mean, the sanctions have made life in Iran very difficult. The Iranian currency has lost 2/3 of its value since 2011. There have been food shortages in Iran of basic staples. Iranian hospitals have been unable to get the supplies they need, basic medicine and equipment, because of the American sanctions. An Iranian political figure told The Guardian that the country's hospitals do not have the medicine needed to treat cancer, and multiple sclerosis in particular. Sanctions have been devastating for everyday life in Iran. Whatever you think about that as a tactic, whatever you think about leveraging the misery of a civilian population in order to create pressure on that country's government, that's what sanctions were intended to do. They were intended to create pressure, and that is what they did. And when Iran's new president was elected in August, it was a surprise. He was a moderate politician. He was not a front-runner in the election. And then he won decisively. He got more than 50% of the vote. There didn't even have to be a runoff. The guy in second place got 16% of the vote. The moderate president's victory was decisive. The Iranian people chose the candidate who represented the biggest break from the hardline policies that had resulted in this crippling sanctions regime. And since he was elected, the new president has been saying that he is clear, that he has a mandate for moderation, that he has a mandate to change his country's place in the world, a mandate both from the Iranian people and, crucially, from the behind-the-scenes unelected powers that be in Iran, from the clerics who actually run everything. The new president has not been shy about having the power to make dramatic decisions about his country's future. He says he has the mandate, and he is empowered to do it, and he's going to do it.
This show is a review of the reviews, as it were. Been watching politics for 10 years. This is my manifestation of trying to make real the idea of blogosphere.com back in 2004. Yeah, that was me. Didn't do anything with it. Went and joined the law firm. All right, and you may notice that a lot of the reviews, well, it seems to be quite oriented towards MSNBC. Well, there's a reason for that. One, we get to keep alive the Keep Olbermann tradition of paperwork in your camera face. But seriously, more importantly, MSNBC is the only cable news network that I know of and have seen. And I used to watch Fox News quite a bit years ago when blogosphere was in my mind. And I wrote many a treatise on the current issues going on back then. But they are the only network, MSNBC, again, whom has, or that has, Republicans on point. Scarborough country until the Imus debacle. Now he's on in the morning, and that's like, 3 to 6 in the morning here, Pacific time. So I don't get to see him as much. But you got S.A. per se, per se, on the cycle, and they have plenty of Republican guests on it. They even used to have Laura Ingraham and Ann Coulter on there. This is MSNBC. That's why we cover them. All right, so they're on every day. They have such great material. My intent is to try to bring these things to you, in case you missed them, for posterity's sake. And so you may be asking, well, the Tai Chi, well, you're not demonstrating martial arts. No, the Tai Chi martial art came long after the Tai Chi, the symbol of yin and yang. The origin of yin and yang is right here, the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. I wholeheartedly recommend it as reading for anybody of any faith, because it's the only book that's given me peace. And it's not so much a religious or organized religion kind of a book. It's more of a spiritual, philosophical guideline as to how to get along with everyone and everything in the universe. All right, so I've set it up. So at the end of each show, I'm going to try to read a bit of wisdom from the Tao Te Ching, and also quote something from myself that represents the right of center, since she can't talk, because a lot of times MSNBC does represent the left of center, or just the slightly left of center viewpoint. The only Republican talking points you might get is vis-a-vis the guests. So I'm going to prove that I'm a little bit right of center and present things to you such as it may come up.